I secretly opened a tattoo parlor in our garage and kept it from my dad cop. That day, I was flipping through our crime news feeds waiting for another client. Wow, there's a maniac in the city. What an ugly face. At this point, the door creaked. I turned around and froze. Beard, earrings, everything was exactly as on the photo robot from the news. Wow, cool! My detective mind immediately went into the game. The man did not introduce himself but only extended to me his hand. There in the column were tattoos and crossed out women's names. Damn, why are they all crossed out? I had to cross out the last one. Lucy. My favorite name. It was my neighbor's name. The most beautiful girl in the world. I was in love with her for years. Yep, I was only 13 and she was 19. But so what? Because of my fascination with detectives, I had almost no friends and everyone laughed at me. But cops actually did not cope. Here, there was a maniac in the city. I would catch him, and Lucy would want to date me right away. My hands shook a little under the stark gaze that the beard did. He asked me to finish as soon as possible. I was even more terrified from this calm intonation. He behaved like nothing happened. Final touch, and it's ready. I wanted to expose this freak and ask if the entire county police were looking for him. But someone went into the garage. I turned around. It was Lucy! But she didn't even look at me and headed to this man and called him Max. So, okay, now I knew his name. She hugged him, saying she missed him. And then she naughtily added, "You like hanging out with kids more than with me?" What? She's talking about me, isn't she? And then it came to me. She dated this Max guy. But why then did he just cross out her name? I was stunned. Lucy led him by the hand to the exit. Max said he needed to go into the store and that a surprise would await her in the evening. They left, and I was paralyzed by the thought that Max wanted to deal with Lucy. Looked like she was the next victim of a mad maniac. I discreetly followed Max. He headed to the sports store. Weird. I was walking between the rows trying to find him, and then I saw Max picking a baseball bat. Now I've got you. I took out the phone to get a photo proof, but the click of my camera was heard by the entire store. Max turned around too and moved quickly to the counter, which I hid behind. My heart was popping out of my chest. What happens if this Hulk finds out about me? But then Max was distracted by the seller. I rushed away and ran to Lucy's house. I'll save her and she'll know what I really am. And those people who laughed at me and my dad and the whole city too. But on the doorstep I slowed down. I thought I feared talking to her even more than I feared a mad maniac. Come on, you can do it, I said to myself and knocked. Lucy opened the door and immediately asked, "What do you need?" I blushed and babbled that her boyfriend was a maniac. Lucy laughed, stroked me on the cheek and said I was cute, but shouldn't meddle in people's lives. Lucy, you will change your mind when you see what your boyfriend was buying at the store. I got the phone out, but Lucy asked not to spoil the surprise and immediately slammed the door. I went home and saw the police car in the yard. My dad came back from duty. Unfortunately, I didn't have him as cool a cop as Sherlock Holmes, and I questioned whether I should tell him about Max, even more so than Dad would know about my underground tattoo parlor. But Lucy's life was at stake. I went up to my dad and told him everything. Surprisingly, he was cool about it, but said I needed to watch detective movies less. He also added that it was illegal to open a tattoo parlor at my age and that I should wrap things up with it. I knew so. He always forbid me everything. But after a little pause, he mysteriously added that he had already seen my album with tattoos and that I was talented with it, but only in drawing. An investigation should be handled by professionals. Afterwards, he promised that he would run this Max through the system tomorrow and flopped onto the couch watching TV. Suddenly, there was a roar of a motorcycle outside the window. I looked out and saw that it was Max's bike. He stopped by for Lucy, now took her somewhere. I need to catch up with him. I ran so hard that I was blacking out, constantly losing sight of them, but still I got it. The bike was parked outside an abandoned cafe, and sounds of bumps and screams were heard from the backyard. I grabbed a stick, walked around the cafe, and looked cautious from behind the corner. What's going on here? Max for some reason had his eyes blindfolded and he had already swung his bat. Oh no! And then I noticed a piñata, a ball toy stuffed with candy. Hold on a second. What does this all mean? At this point my dad called me. Max turned around on the sound of the ringing and oh damn! At 3 jumps he was nearby and grabbed me by the hood. I dangled stupidly over the ground until I fell. Max said he was going to take me home now. Max asked Lucy to wait for him at the lodge house. He forcefully put me on the bike and whispered ominously that I had prevented him from saying goodbye to Lucy forever. What? He does not even hide that he wants to finish her off. I need more evidence. And then I noticed Max's cell phone sticking out of his pocket. I gently tried to get it, but Max yelled for me to hold on tightly. We sharply slowed down at the intersection. I rolled off the bike, allegedly clinging to Max's jacket. A bruised elbow, but I still got his phone. We drove up to the house. Seeing my dad, I immediately ran to him. Dad, arrest him! He admitted that he would want to finish Lucy. But instead, my dad just locked me in the room and said I was under house arrest. I wasn't going to give up so easy. And most importantly, I already had a solid evidence, Mike's cell phone. And indeed, it was full of chats with girls. There was no time to think, so I opened the window and carefully climbed out. I needed to save Lucy. In his text messages, there were coordinates to the guest house by the lake, which Max spoke about. But it was a 2-hour drive. How do I get there? There were no taxis at night. And then my dad's car caught my eyes. I could find myself in prison for this, but I was ready to take a chance. Lucy's life mattered more. I got in the car and wanted to start it, but accidentally turned on the siren. Damn, not that button! My dad stormed out right away and ran to me screaming. I quickly started the car and hit the gas. I'll save Lucy. I'll reveal Max, and you'll understand everything, Dad. 2 hours later, I was already near the lake and left the car away so I could not be noticed. I saw in the movies that they did so, but my legs refused to go. I exhaled. If I end up dead today, then at least I will be remembered as a hero. I rushed to the house, but someone grabbed me from behind, clutching my mouth. It was Max. Terrified, I tried to break out, but he only squeezed me harder. He started whispering some nonsense into my ears. Turns out Lucy was after him, and now we were both in danger. I didn't believe a word. As soon as Max's grip loosened, I yelled with all my might, "Lucy, save yourself!" And then she appeared. Sloped hair, mad look, bat in hand. "Go to the house," she told Max. And he, turning pale, went to the door. I was so glad she was alive, but Lucy hissed to me, "Where did you come from, little brat?" She grabbed my hand and dragged me inside the house. I didn't understand anything. Locking up Max, she dragged me into the next room. It was not possible to break out. Lucy held my hands tightly. Tying me to a chair, she, as insane, repeated that she was sure of Max's love and he decided to dump her. She wasted so much time, got rid of all his girlfriends, and she was about to dump her? That's it. Now he would pay for her suffering. So was Lucy a maniac? That thought made me shiver. Lucy left. And from the next room there were shouts and rumble. I had to do something. Tightly tied up, I could only make the chair rickety in the hope that it would fall and break. I knew this sometimes worked in detectives. I pushed myself with my feet and fell on my back. The chair turned out to be strong. Tied to a chair, I still tried to approach the door. I hardly opened it with my foot and crawled into the room where Max was. I started hitting the door with my foot, and in the end, the tree cracked. Through the slit, I saw Lucy's enraged face. "Max, run!" I tried to scream, but Max didn't hear me. He was passed out. "Lucy, what did you do with him?" Lucy dramatically opened the door. "You already know too much, jerk." I squeezed my eyes shut in terror. Suddenly, there were sirens. Finally, police! Lucy tried to escape, but was quickly apprehended by police officers. My dad also walked among them. It was strange, but Dad looked so cool. Lucy was immediately detained, and Dad untied me and said I had just saved Max's life. I was so grateful to my dad for help. But how did he find me? It turned out that all police cars were equipped with beacons, so it wasn't difficult. On the way home, Dad said I had a flair for criminals, just like he had in his youth. I didn't understand anything. But what about the photo robot from the news? It was Max. Dad bursted out laughing and said all the beardies were similar. I had to be careful when I blamed someone. A couple weeks later, Dad caught the real maniac, and Lucy turned out to have done nothing of that to Max's girls. She only intimidated them by forcing them to break up with him. So soon I closed the tattoo parlor and immersed in the cases. I decided to only draw during my spare time, and for now, I am actively preparing for admission to the police academy. And one day Max came to my house. We hugged like old friends. After all, we'd been through so much together. And then he said he came for a new tattoo, and even though I didn't do it anymore, Max convinced me, saying that it was very important to him. I asked which name we would tattoo this time. Max replied briefly, "Yours." I was the only reason he still believed in people. I would never forget how I saved him, and girls dumped him all the time. He doesn't know anything. I told him Lucy was to blame for breaking up with the girls. Max was stunned. He said he had already practically lost faith in himself, but now he understood why all the girls dumped him. "Thank you, mates," Max uttered. Then I admitted to him that I was wrong too, when I mistook him for a maniac, and when I thought it was possible to catch criminals, as in movies. And now I decided to change my life. I enrolled in a police academy and attended class after school. After that, Max severely shook my hand. He told me that he believed that one day I would definitely be a real cop.
Hi, my name is Christy. Have you ever had a lot of money in your hands? Maybe you received a large inheritance or a gift from rich relatives? This happened to me. I became rich at 15 years old. Watch this video to the end and you will learn what difficulties come with wealth and how to deal with them. It so happened that I never knew my parents. Since I was a baby, I was raised in an orphanage. I was lucky. We had very kind teachers and good kids. We were all one close-knit family. When someone was picked up, which was very rare, we all got very bored and, if possible, continued to communicate. I lived in this place for 15 years, and I didn't even think about the possibility that someone might adopt me. But one day, a rich married couple came to us. They could not have children and wanted to take a child from the orphanage. Moreover, they wanted to take an older child to avoid the worries associated with young children. So their choice fell on me. I met with them, and it seemed to me that they were good people. And besides, they were also very rich, which meant that I would live in comfort. A couple of weeks later, I moved into their house. It was a huge 3-story cottage in the center of our city. I got my own huge room, a computer, a game console, and delicious food. I was also given large amounts of pocket money. I was so thrilled. Have you ever had a situation where you suddenly got everything you wanted? However, as time went on, I began to realize that things were not as smooth as I thought. At some point, they started talking to me in an irritated and cold way. If I did something wrong, they would start swearing at me, accusing me of being careless. At first, I thought it would pass with time, but the number of claims only increased. I was tired of putting up with it, so I decided to ask what it was all about. At dinner that night, I told them that I had noticed how often they were angry with me, and I wanted to find out what was wrong. They started saying that everything was fine, but I was not satisfied with this answer. I told them it would be better for everyone if we discussed it. But they were only more angry at my words. After another question, my father flared up and launched into a tirade about how bad I was behaving. My mother supported his every word. After another argument, they took away my pocket money and sent me to my room. I pretended to obey, and then I slipped out of the house to meet my friend from the orphanage named Robin. We agreed that we would meet in the city park. When we met, he said that he had bad news. The orphanage was running out of money. The city's funding was not enough, and if this went on, the orphanage would be closed. I asked what would happen to the kids. Robin replied that they would be distributed to other orphanages in the nearest cities. This was terrible. All the kids were so attached to each other, it would hurt them very much if they were separated. In addition, it was not known whether house mothers in other orphanages were as kind as we had. I promised Robin that I would try to help the orphanage in any way I could. The next day, I went to my foster father and told him about the orphanage situation. I hoped that he, being rich enough, would help the orphanage where I grew up. My father understood me completely wrong. He started accusing me of getting money out of him and that I didn't understand how hard it was for him to get it. As a result, he forbade me to see the children from the orphanage, saying that this would prevent me from becoming a full member of society. I was upset, but I didn't give up. I started thinking about how else I could help the orphanage. I decided to go to work, but there was a problem. All the ads that I watched were looking for people not under the age of 16. Finally, I came across an ad for a leaflet distributor that didn't specify the minimum age. I called them, and they took me right away. I started going to work every day after school. They didn't pay much, but I had to do something. What would you be willing to work 6 hours after each school day for? One day, I saw two men. I recognized them as friends of my foster parents. They just waved and walked past me, and I didn't even care. However, a couple of days later, my mother was not home, and my foster father called me over. He was tense and stern. His friends told him that I was handing out leaflets, and he didn't like it very much. He said that I should not waste time on such nonsense and study economics and business theory instead, so that in the future I could take over his business. He didn't even ask me what I wanted to do. He had already decided everything for me. I got mad at him and told him what I thought. I told him that he was doing nothing to me and had no right to tell me what to do. It made him mad. He started shouting at me, accusing me of being ungrateful and saying that I had to listen to him because I was his daughter. I wasn't going to bend, so I answered him. I called him a greedy, violent lunatic who would never be my father. At that moment, I got a slap in the face. My father, who had slapped me, stood panting, his face red with anger. I was in so much pain, not physically, but mentally, that I started to cry. He also demanded that I didn't tell anyone about it, threatening to ruin my life if I did. He said that with his connections, he could easily put me in jail or deprive me of the opportunity to get a normal job. He left, and I went back to my room, crying and trembling with fear. I realized I couldn't stay here any longer. I packed my things at night. But before I left, I had an idea. I thought that my foster father was really a scoundrel, and it would be all right if I took some money from him to take it to the orphanage. I crept into my parents' bedroom and, very quietly, so as to not wake anyone, found his wallet in his bag. Soon I reached the orphanage. I went to the house mother and told her everything that happened. She was shocked and very worried about me. She allowed me to stay at the orphanage despite the fact that she could have problems. I thanked her and gave her the money I had taken from my father. I lied about earning it though. I went to bed, and in the morning I woke up to some screams outside the door. I looked out and saw my father and several police officers, and the house mother was standing in front of them. My father noticed me and pulled me out of the room. He said I would go with him, but I resisted. I broke free and ran away from him to the house mother. The father began to threaten that he would charge the house mother with child abduction, and the police would be on his side. I was terrified. I couldn't figure out if my foster mom knew what he was doing. But I didn't want the house mother to have any problems, so I agreed to go with my father. However, I had a plan. My father was silent all the way home, but I knew I was going to get a lot of trouble at home. He probably noticed the money was missing, and I didn't think he was going to let me get away with it. There was only one thing I needed to do. When we got home, I jumped out of the car and ran quickly to my room. I heard my father following me. I quickly took out my phone, turned on the camera, and put it in an inconspicuous place. Then my father came into the room. Without saying a word, he hit me in the face and then started screaming. I had never been so humiliated. He called me a thief and a bastard. Then he hit me a few more times and left. I was hurt, but I was glad. There was evidence on my phone that he was hitting me. I didn't care about his threats. I was going to sit back. I went to the police and showed them the tape. No amount of connections helped the father avoid being punished for child abuse. He and my mother were deprived of custody of me and forced to pay me monetary compensation. At the trial, I felt sorry for my mother. She didn't seem to know that my father was hitting me, and she was sad that everything had turned out this way. Before this situation, I thought that if I had a lot of money, I would be happier. But now I realize that even with a lot of money, you can be unhappy and angry. I was happy to return to the orphanage, and the compensation my father paid was enough to fix the situation with its budget. Once in the orphanage, I began to appreciate the place even more and began to actively help with the housework and care for babies. Also, working as a promoter, I realized that it was time to think about my future profession, and I decided to devote myself to social work in order to give joy to those who found themselves in a difficult situation like me. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel and put a like, and click the bell icon. This way, you can be the first to watch new stories. All the best to you. Don't let the wealth pass you by.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy, 18 years old. Have your tastes changed with age? For example, when you were a child, you hated cauliflower, and now you can't live without it? For example, I have always thought that tattoos are strange and dangerous and ugly. Watch this video to the end and find out how it happened that I tattooed myself almost completely. A year ago, my folks gathered at the sea to celebrate the anniversary of their relationship. Yeah, cool. I was all for it. Why not? But at this time, my aunt's son, Vic, was due to visit us. He said he was going to open a business selling irons, boxes, sweets. Come on, guys, I don't know. And he would stay with us until he figured out where he would live. It's probably a good idea, but seriously, I can't remember a more boring person than this Vic. He was some kind of philologist, went into sales, so to say, from boredom to deadly boredom. Why the hell should we welcome him? Especially since I'm not a baby anymore. I'm 17. Give me a credit card and I'll be fine for at least a year without any Vics. Did you have to defend your independence in front of your parents? I didn't want to argue. Why spoil people's vacation? I'll bear it. In any case, neither my nor my parents' expectations were met. When Vic arrived, we were like, kid, and where is Vic? It's just that Vic was all covered in tattoos. Well, okay, not all of him, but like the neck, arms, back, legs. Except the face was open. And he still was such a nice guy in glasses and a shirt. It was crazy. Of course, my parents weren't sure if I should be left alone with Vic. But when he started talking about irregular verbs, Ma and Pa were relieved and went away. I thought it wouldn't be so bad at first. Yeah, it was even worse. Vic wasn't just a college-educated nerd. He was also a clingy, mean-spirited devil calling strictly at 7 p.m. with questions, well, where are you there? Let's wrap it up. Checking my every step and telling me off even when I went to bed at 10 o'clock. My parents didn't keep an eye on me like that idiot. I tried complaining to my friends. Aha, I knew better than that. It didn't give any result at all. Look, you're exaggerating. He's just so caring. If I had a cousin like that, I wouldn't leave the house at all. But Tracy, he's so hot. Exactly. They were all crazy about him. I had great friends. I would stand up for them if some dork started controlling their free time. On the third week, I broke down and made a huge row, threatening to run away from home because this was no longer a house, but a prison of some kind. Suddenly, Vic agreed. I was confused because I hadn't expected him to remain so calm. Don't get me wrong, Tracy. I hate people getting involved in my personal life. My parents bothered me all my childhood, and I remembered this annoyance well. But I promised your parents I'd look after you, and I wouldn't want anything to happen to you. Have you ever had a relationship in your life that started with a terrible enmity and eventually led to friendship? Once Vic apologized, everything turned upside down. I gave him my word that I would not indulge in thrash and debauchery, at least without his participation, yo ho ho. And I would send him photos, call him back. Anyway, I would let him know that everything was okay with me. We had such a heartfelt conversation with Vic that he admitted that he wanted to open a tattoo salon in our city. In his native city, he would not have a clientele, but here, there were more people, in particular young people, and there would be more demand for it. "Oh," he said, "do you want to tattoo yourself?" I was taken aback by his words. "Get a tattoo, you mean? Me? Didn't he promise my parents that he would leave me safe and sound? How did he even imagine it?" I refused, of course. And then I started thinking. Tattoos in general did not attract me, but they also did not repel me. Could I imagine myself with a drawing? I couldn't even imagine myself in a dress. My head didn't work like that. But maybe we should try it. If, for example, I did something small somewhere under the neck from the back. "Oh, okay, Vic. Let's do it." I had no idea that it would take so long, and then I should go with polyethylene sheeting for a few days. I always wanted to take it off. I already regretted what I had done 200 times, and Vic kept forbidding me to touch and pick at the wound. And he was absolutely right. I didn't really see the drawing, but I could feel myself changing under its influence. How I walked with my back straight, how I wanted to constantly show the drawing. I began to worry about why I had tattooed the drawing in such an inconvenient place from the very beginning. Of course, I chose a place that my parents might not see, but damn, could I tattoo something else? I avoided the thought until the last moment, tried not to think about it, but everything around me seemed to say, "Come on, Tracy, make up your mind. It's so easy." There was a queue of my friends who wanted to have a tattoo from Vic. Sometimes he had orders every day. And we sat in the evening and laughed about how suddenly his business went up. But one day I blurted out, "On the next drawing," and Vic immediately seized on this miscue, lit up, and said, "Well, let's do it." I was stubborn. I reminded him about my parents, but deep down, I had already made up my mind. A couple of ideas for tattoos turned into a couple of hundred. We didn't have time to do everything, it was physically impossible. But one small drawing followed another. On the leg, on the arm, on the stomach. What, did you think this was the end of the story? Not so. I became a model for Vic. He was shooting me for his portfolio, and in the process, we discussed new ideas. And we were very excited about the idea for his salon. He had already completed the paperwork and was looking for a place with cheap rent to prepare it and hire employees. I was so happy for him. Eventually, Vic opened the door to a world I couldn't and didn't want to get out of. It remained only to reconcile my parents with this information. Uh-oh. When they returned from the sea, they did not believe what they saw at first. They thought that I had painted myself with a marker on a bet with my friends, laughed, and sent me to wash away this nightmare. I also laughed and said that water could not wash it off. My mother was the first to get nervous. Then it came to my father. Vic was with me the whole time. I kept trying to persuade him to hide in his rented apartment, but he remained as stubbornly honest and decided to explain everything to my parents and take responsibility for his actions. Well, it all ended predictably. Dad almost destroyed him on the spot, banned him from our house, yelled at me for giving in to the corrupting influence of a vile brother. He threw Vic out, took my phone and internet, locked me in my room, and spent another half day running around the house screaming, "Gods, my daughter looks like a criminal now!" I did not lose heart, but almost immediately developed a plan. I had to wait a few days until my mother relented and suggested that we spend the evening as a family watching a movie. I got to my laptop, and instead of clicking the play button, I started calling Vic in Messenger. He was about as confused as Pa and Ma, but I took the initiative and started talking non-stop. Yes, Pa and Ma, Vic did my tattoos. It was my idea, and I ended up asking Vic to paint me, and I didn't want to stop. No, it wouldn't go away. No, I didn't want them to disappear. Yes, I had made up my mind that this was how I wanted to look. I was still going to study game design. They had seen worse things. No, I didn't have skin cancer, and I would be very careful that it didn't occur. Maybe one day I would remove them all. Who knew? And I asked not to get mad at Vic. Besides the tattoos, he made me go to bed at 10 and eat vegetables. Mom and Dad listened to me carefully, and Dad said, "You won't stop doing that, will you?" Nah. I promised and gave him a big hug. And then I hugged Mom, and would have hugged Vic if the monitor screen had allowed it. Of course, it wasn't easy for them to accept the way I looked now. Yes, even I sometimes felt strange to see myself in the mirror. But the house arrest was commuted. That's the main thing. Be yourself, girls, and subscribe to our channel, as well as send your stories to us. Bye-bye!